So, Marvel seems to keep going forward with new movies with no clear sign of stopping. Is anybody else feeling rather burnt out on this franchise? First and foremost, I need to establish that I've been with the MCU since the beginning. I saw Iron Man in the theatres way back in 2008 and loved it. And I've been with this franchise ever since. There's a few movies I still haven't seen, like Eternals, but for the most part, I've loved this franchise and most of the movies that come with it, despite the bumps in the road. Well, now it feels like those bumps have become rather big potholes, or plot holes, if you will. Ugh. And it's really starting to lose me at this point. I think generally the MCU's problem is the grander problem that Disney has been having for a while now. Ever since John Lasseter left, it feels like the company's been going in a very gradual downward spiral. Now don't get me wrong, I understand why they got rid of Lasseter, I'm not going to argue against that. But it does feel that the people who have replaced him haven't been doing as good of a job that he did. The MCU has actually suffered the least out of this over the years. With Star Wars, the first two sequels, I actually quite enjoyed. And then Rise of Skywalker happened and then threw that in the bin. And the Disney and Pixar movies have been a bit up and down, but they're clearly not quite as consistent as they were a couple of years back. But with the MCU, it seems like it's finally caught up with them, whereas they started off as being a little bit awkward, but still mostly enjoyable after Endgame. Now it feels like the flaws have really caught up with them, and they have been putting out a couple of really mediocre movies. It's mostly because of the various hits and misses we've gotten last year. I actually did really like Multiverse Madness. It was really weird, and it did have a lot of the same flaws that Sam Raimi has in a lot of his movies, but I generally really enjoyed it. But then we also got Love and Thunder, which felt like a very rushed and ham-fisted follow-up to the epicness that was Thor Ragnarok. And even though it did have some good moments, I didn't really enjoy it all that much. Though it does get some points for me for having a severely reduced role for Tessa Thompson compared to the last movie. Yeah, if you don't know, I really do not like Tessa Thompson as an actress, so that's a big plus for me in that regard. Their TV shows have also been suffering really badly as well, and while they've been generally very hit and miss since the beginning, for the most part they do have a lot of good elements about it. And I've seen Loki, I've seen Falcon and the Winter Soldier, and I've seen What If, and I love those series. But then I watched She-Hulk. Now, I will be honest, I actually did quite enjoy quite a few elements about She-Hulk. There was actually some really good parts when it came down to the actual law procedural stuff in the courtroom. That was actually very clever, and I actually really enjoyed it. But yeah, most of the jokes were very, very poor and really not funny, and the ending was an absolute travesty. A lot of people like to use that clip in the show of She-Hulk twerking with Megan Thee Stallion as the kind of pinnacle example of how bad the show is. And normally I'd say something like, well, you're just seeing it out of context. It doesn't give the whole story about how bad the show is. Yeah, this is one of the rare examples where it does really sum up how that show is really bad in just a couple of seconds. It doesn't want to be relevant, it doesn't want to be clever, it doesn't even really want to have any very witty humour, it just wants to have very stupid, very brainless humour and cashing in on things that have been dated for over 10 years. Whether this is just due to franchise fatigue or just because the people who have been running this franchise are not the same people that they were now, I don't know, but this has resulted in a couple of movies that back when I was a superfan, I would have watched without question. But now I haven't even bothered seeing. I have not seen Quantumania, I have not seen Black Panther 2, and I really don't feel like I want to watch them. What was really good about the MCU in general is that they had the perfect mix of being able to give us great fan service from the comics, but also be very appealing to the general public, which was brilliant. And they really did make these movies feel sophisticated, as best as they could do, being comic books. But it felt like they were respecting their audience, but they were also respecting the long, hardcore fans of these franchises. It really is probably some of the best comic book movies we've ever had ever, and probably some of the best general comic book media we have ever seen. And I am definitely more of a Marvel fan than a DC fan. I like both of them, but DC definitely has the more old-fashioned, majestic style of superheroics, which is fine, but I prefer Marvel's more imaginative and very modern style of superheroics. It's just my preferred preference. And the MCU movies really do capture that, but in updating them so that they feel appropriate for the modern day and for all audiences. Some of the goofier elements have not been implemented, though they have gradually started to become a bit more like the comics, but I felt that they were doing it in a clever and very gentle way at first. Now it feels like they're trying to be a bit too heavy-handed with trying to make it too much like the comics, and it has come back to bite them in the arse. Either way, I really feel like I am done with the MCU now, and I'm sorry, but it has been because that this franchise has really started to go downhill. Now, with that being said, I'm definitely going to be watching Guardians of the Galaxy 3 when it comes out. The Guardians movies have been my favourite of all the MCU movies, and I'm really excited to see this one. If anything, because it allows us to speculate what songs are going to be in this one, which I might do a separate video for that anyway. It'll also be funny to see the fact that this is basically James Gunn going to be saying F you to Disney throughout the whole thing. Because if you don't know the full story, back after Guardians of the Galaxy 2 was made, James Gunn was fired for making some inappropriate Twitter comments. Which, to be fair, given where he started at Troma Studios, that really doesn't surprise me. But Disney felt that they couldn't find anybody to take over his role in being the writer and director of the third movie, so they begrudgingly had to invite him back because nobody else could take his role. That is an incredible achievement, to have Disney backtrack and apologise for something that they've done, which they very rarely do. It's also a great indictment on no matter where you started from in movies, or I guess in anywhere really, you can go on to make something incredible and emotional. James Gunn, like I said, got his start working for Troma Studios, the most exploitative and sleazy film studio ever. Though granted, I actually do really like and respect what they do, but you get what I mean. They're not supposed to be high art. And he went from that to making some of the best superhero movies ever made, that actually a few times got really close to making me cry on a few occasions, which is very impressive actually. It takes a lot to get me to cry at a movie, but they got very damn close, so I'm really looking forward to the third movie. But that's probably going to be the last of the MCU films I see in the theatre. I might see some more, but they'll probably be on Disney+, but more likely I'm just not going to bother watching them anymore. And I may still check out some of the TV shows. I really like Loki, so I'm looking forward to seeing what they do for Series 2 of that. I really liked What If. I know a lot of people didn't, but I really enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what else they do in that series. And to be honest, I'm curious to see if they do She-Hulk Series 2, because like I said, there is potential there, and if they work on it, it could actually become a good show. But things have been going really downhill for Marvel, and I don't see them picking up. I think that they need to go out with dignity at this point. But because this is Disney, they're not going to let that happen, so here's to seeing Marvel die a slow and painful death.